before I start, yes, indeed, Alfie is alive. Don't worry, you know, he's still swimming, he's still breathing. No, he's not coming back. But anyways, nonetheless, today we are going to learn about what I love doing most, and that is basically photography. And photography has always been a passion of mine. I started when I was 10 years old, but that's a whole another story. Anyways, you're gonna learn the physics, surprise, surprise, of lenses. Wow! What? Wow! Claps all around, dude. What a surprise. Anyways, we're gonna learn about lenses and how lenses work specifically. And to even get started on lenses and how they work at all, how they were figured out, was back in the 5th century BC from a Chinese philosopher named from a Chinese philosopher named Mo Ti. And basically what he did was he created this room, which he called a locked treasure. In this locked treasure room, it would be a room like this, except without any windows. There wouldn't be any single bit of light coming in, except for this pinhole. Now light travels in a single direction, a straight line, if you will. And no matter where it's going, no matter what direction it may be, it will always be straight. Mo Ti, what he did was he created this box to capture light, to see what it would create. Now this light will go through in any direction, whether it be up, down, in the middle, all around, whatever, it still goes straight. Since light does travel in a straight line, me being inverted, it created a whole new spectrum of light. It created this new phenomena, this magic of light. This was technically when photography was first created, but the term wouldn't technically be coined until the early 1800s. Besides being known, what would later be known as photography, but this camera obscura would be used for many other things. Nonetheless, it would mostly be used for artists, where artists would lock themselves in a tent. They would close the tent and only allow a small pinhole. And this pinhole, whatever light came through, would be refracted across the wall. And artists would take these images and paint, and it might be portraits of people, sculptures, anything you can think of, that they would create. And then later on, scientists then found a use for them as well, where they would take it out into the night sky and isolate the light that came from stars. Scientists would try to chart maps and all these different star maps and basically study the lights that are up above. But in any case, we're here to learn about lenses, not the history of where it came from, although it is quite interesting. First, let's start off with a single lens. I'll take this magnifying glass for example. Light can shine through this. Light travels through the lens, and since this lens bends, which would be called a convex lens, the light becomes refracted and inverts an image, similar to that of the pinhole. Now the pinhole would be in its own room, darkness, no light whatsoever. That's the only reason why that would be inverted. Whereas in the sense of this lens, no matter where this light may be coming from, I can still create an image because that's all I need is a light. To show you an example, I'll take my record of Bastille's, one of its newest albums, and show you. Now here we can see the window. That's the window I have all the way over there. That is my window. And we will take this lens, and what happens is the light, when refracted correctly at a certain distance, you can see the curtain. Now if I move backwards, it becomes blurry. If I move forwards, it becomes unblurry. This is what we would call a focal point. The lenses within a camera, much like this one, if I move out of the way, it will focus on the back. But if I move closer, it focuses on my arm. This is what we call autofocus within a camera. But in this sense, lenses would be moved back and forth to capture the image, hopefully a sharp image, much like this one. The lenses in a camera would do the same thing, where they would move back and forth in order to capture the proper light. Here we have a refracted image. similar to that of the camera obscura. This would be technically our pinhole. That light, or the inverted image you see in the magnifying glass, would technically be seen across the wall. And this type of law, the law of optics at least, can be seen anywhere you go, no matter what type of light you see. As long as you have a proper lens, a proper convex lens, you can see any image. If you don't have a convex lens, which would be uncommon, but you would have a convex lens, in the instance that you do not, your image would not be refracted, unless you're in a pinhole-sized room. In most lenses, or at least for those who do own a camera or have seen a camera, you can see that the bulbs inside are rounded. Now each lens also differs. Every lens has its own type of mirror system, its own focal length, its own focal point. Now focal length and focal point are two different things, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But each lens has its own convex lens. Now it depends on what certain camera you have. You can have a DSLR, which has interchangeable lenses. This would be a 35mm lens, or you could have an SLR, or what we would call a film camera. And most film cameras come with a 50mm lens, which is the one I have here, and it's a little bit harder to attach because this one uses a clip system. Nonetheless, it can still be used. Now the difference between SLR and DSLR is the idea behind it. SLRs, which are typically known as film cameras, use what we obviously know as film. Within these film cameras, you use what we call a mirror. Now when the lens opens, much as it does when I take a picture, when the lens opens, it will open for a split second, depending on the type of picture you are taking. In this case, we will turn the shutter speed, which is how fast the lens opens and closes, to allow all the light in. Now when the lens opens, it will let in a small amount of light that will then be reflected onto a film. In this case, I would technically take the film out, not right now. In the essence that you are going to use a film camera, you are going to need obviously film. Now the only reason why these SLR cameras use film is because film is a piece of paper or a roll of laminated paper that is light sensitive. It is filled with light sensitive chemicals that allow, obviously when you take a picture, it to be recorded. This film will then record the image, and then you will take this roll of film to a private studio known as a darkroom. Back in the days, not many people had darkroom. They were expensive, as you needed plenty different types of chemicals, and you needed a room to be enclosed, much like a camera obscura. Except in this instance, you didn't really want any light. Any UV light that would be seen might be recorded onto the film. If the light is seen onto the film no longer is usable, where the film becomes washed out and the image is no longer recorded, as new light has taken over that film. Now in the sense of DSLRs, it becomes digitally recorded. Now in this sense, I would be using a 35mm lens, which is what I like to call a macro lens. It is not technically a macro lens, but it can be used as such. And all I have to do, after I turn it on, I forgot a battery. After I turn it on, all I have to do is point, shoot, and the image becomes recorded into the camera. Now, although we do not have film, in this instance we would use what we call an SD card. Now, the image that gets seen through this lens, the image that gets refracted through the lens gets recorded into the camera and into the system. The mirror that is used within the camera has these little pixel sensors. Now these pixel sensors will pick up the light that gets refracted onto this mirror, will then take the image and record it into the SD card, which will then be digitally produced for modern photography. Now we get into the idea of lenses. Each lens has its own lens system. Each lens owns about, depending on what kind of lens you are using, owns about at least 5 different types of lenses within it. Different convex lenses as well. Some might be flat in order to sharpen the image, and some might be more bent than the other. In any case, these convex lenses will be used to refract the light a little bit more than other types of lenses. Hence why some lenses are a lot sharper than others, depending on their focal points and focal length. Now, focal points and focal lengths are two different things. Focal point is what we described earlier with this magnifying glass. Now, what will happen is when I move back and forth, you saw the image got blurrier or sharper. In this instance, I'm sharp. I am within the focal point, or at least the camera is recording my focal point, the distance between me and the camera. Now, the focal point will then focus on that focal point, which would be my desk, my monitor, and my wall. That is a different focal point. That is the longer distance between my camera and the wall. Here we have it focus on me, and now we have it focus on the wall. Essentially, each lens has its own focal point, but also each lens has its own focal distance. Focal distance, maybe you heard of it as f-stop. Now, f-stop would be the magnification of that lens, which basically means, now my camera currently has a 3.5 focal distance, or 3.5 f-stop, which basically means when I'm in focus, my background is out of focus. Now in this instance, most lenses do have a 3.5 focal distance, but in some cases, whereas my 35mm lens, I have a focal distance as low as 1.4. Majority of lenses can go as high as 20, but you don't really want to go that high because the focal distance is also your aperture. The aperture is that small little lens that shuts when you take a picture. In any case, the focal distance is the magnification of your focus. Basically meaning, if I took a ruler, if we laid out a ruler, if I have an f-stop of 1.4, I can have maybe half an inch worth being focused. Whereas if I have a focal length of 3.5, which I currently do, I'll have a focal, in the case that I use a 3.5 f-stop, I'll have maybe about 2 to 3 inches worth of focus. Whereas if I go farther, which is as high as f16 or f-stop 16, I'll have maybe 8 inches worth of focus. Now the lower the f-stop, the stronger the magnification. The higher the f-stop, the looser the magnification.